Welcome to the LCS-RNet 15th annual meeting. We are pleased to start second day of the meeting with a keynote presentation on the report Paris at 50 degrees by Alexander Frantan, a Paris City political counselor. Before the presentation, we'd like to invite Dr. Vidhi Abashir from the Indian Institute of Management, Ahmedabad, as the chair of the keynote session. Dr. Abashir, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Kainuma-san. Good day, everyone. And firstly, thank you, Tomoko-san, and thank you, Mikiko-san, for inviting me to be a part of this session. I would also like to extend my compliment to the network and the partners for actually recognizing the need for including adaptation as a part of this entire discussion. It's a very urgent subject indeed, and we should start discussing it, and it's good that we've already started talking about it. With no further delay, I would like to invite Monsieur Alexandre Florentin. He's the chairperson of the report Paris at 50 degrees, and also an elected councillor with the city of Paris. So the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. Can you see my screen?
Yes.
Yes? Okay,
Yes.
perfect. So first of all, I would like to thank you very much for this opportunity to talk to all of you. I accepted this opportunity because I wanted to give a little bit. Community is giving society. I'm among the few people who read scientific paper, although I'm into politics right now. And I must say that nothing that I'm going to present to you would have been possible without the efforts of your community. So that was really important for me to be part of this event. So as it was mentioned, I'm going to present a work that was a 4-year effort for me in Paris. And in order to, before getting into the topic, I wanted to just to let you know from which perspective I'm talking to you. So on the left is a map of Paris showing the average night temperature on the night of July 2019. I'm living in the where the star is, which is one of the hottest area in Paris at night. The red area has roughly 2 million people living there, and the map represents an area where you have roughly 7 million people living. I am among the 163 people who got elected at the Paris level to actually create and deliberate on all the local laws that we have. And this is as an elected citizen of Paris that I have done this work. Paris at 50 degrees, it all started before I got even elected in June 2020, because while I was a professional working on climate change in a consulting company, in 2017, I got to read, thanks to my colleagues, a paper by Bador et al. You have the reference here. A paper that was saying that we could have temperatures between 50 and 55 degrees in France in the second half of the century. And I must admit that as somebody who was born in Paris and who was living there, I was really shocked about this temperature, and got stuck in my mind. And in 2020, when I got elected, I suggested that we should work much more on adaptation that we've done before. Basically, Paris is a city with a history of heat wave. In 2003, there was a major heat wave here that killed a lot of people, and basically the city of Paris was getting ready in case such a heat wave would come back, but it was not getting ready for upcoming heat wave that would be hotter, longer, earlier, later, more frequent during the year. So that's how I got the idea of Paris at 50 degrees. But I must admit that in 2020 or early 2021, I was really afraid of using such a name, because I thought, is it going to frighten people locally? And then in summer 2021, there was almost a 50-degree heat wave in Canada. So I thought, okay, actually that was a good name. Before this transpartisan work was launched, I did a more local study in the district where I am elected. I conducted 40 semi-structured interviews with people owning shops, with different services of the city, such as garbage collecting, such as people dealing with dead bodies, with networks like water, electricity, with the fire workers, local fire workers, and so on. And from this, we had recommendations regarding crisis management in case a big heat wave would come back. But of course, as every report, nobody reads them. So I decided to write a fiction about it, telling how a major heat wave would disrupt the everyday life, and it would not just be like in 2003. This fiction got published on Twitter on an everyday basis, and because I use Twitter because Twitter is the place in France, at least, where politicians and journalists are, and I use that as a way to attract attention on the topic. It helps with the official process, because in July 22, the Paris Council unanimously approved the suggestion to have a transpartisan mission called Paris at 50 degrees. For me also, it was utterly important that it was a transpartisan mission, because I thought, well, with the next election, I have no idea who is going to win the election. Maybe it's going to be the left, maybe it's going to be the right, maybe it's going to be the conservative right, maybe it's going to be the Greens, but I don't know. And still, heat waves are going to be there. So how we worked was that I conducted the work. I was the president of this mission, and I had somebody from the opposition working with me on an almost daily basis. Her name is Maud Lelièvre, and we worked with 15 of those 163 Paris councillors. We had 75 hearings. We heard architects, urbanists. We heard people from the field, people working with schools, with hospitals, with people living in the streets, etc., etc. We analyzed a lot of documents, had written contributions on top of that, and field visits. And in April 2003, the report got adopted with the diagnosis and 85 recommendations. As soon as the report got out, I was really surprised that it got so much media coverage. It got into the news through articles in Le Monde, but also the Washington Post. I got interviewed in the national Australian radio. It got into the front page of a major newspaper in France, and it got it got on the prime times on French television at least 3 times. And it was just a report. My understanding is that the name did half of the job. And I want to insist on that because in the scientific community, you talk a lot about averages and people don't understand averages. You, of course, talk a lot about second half of the century, 2015 and 2100. It doesn't work with politicians and the media. So I chose deliberately to change that by not using averages, by not using dates, but by using a maximum temperature so that people could relate to it. That's the name, and I believe part of the success. The work was then used through a crisis management exercise which had the same name, which has 2 districts involved into a one-day role play. And also the administration had a tabletop drill. So they were simulating how they would react to a major heat wave during a few hours. Later on, and it was not even a month ago, that the urban plan as well, and that's the most important document a city in France can have, because through an urban plan, you decide where to construct, you decide a bit how to construct, and this plan was changed in December 2024, and there was major changes thanks to the work Paris at 50 degrees and other consideration, of course. The climate plan changed, the health environmental change also as well, the resiliency plan. When we talk about resiliency in Paris, we talk about what do we do if there is a major flood, if there is a terrorist attack. Unfortunately, we're very familiar with that. And now we talk a lot also about what do we do if there's major heat wave. And all of them are 50 degrees ready. I'm not completely I'm using this to say between brackets, let's say, because 50 degrees, it's such a new world that I'm not completely sure we are ready, but at least we are doing the best we can right now to be ready to such an event. Paris at 50 degrees started as a collective crime investigation because indeed there are some deaths. The death toll is quite high in France, in Paris, in Western Europe, in the whole world. From that now on, I'm going to show some of the results of the mission, but I will go fast because I'm sure your community knows much more than I do actually the data. But I'm going to explain how we work, how I managed to work with people, for example, from the conservative right or from the ultra-liberal center into actually getting into the same conclusions as my political family. So heat waves are invisible killers. That was the starting point. That's undiscussionable in Paris. People have an experience of that, of the discomfort, and 2003 is still in people's mind. Well, that's a bit weird that so many people die in Paris because we do not have the highest temperatures around the world. However, we are one of the most dense city around the world. We are in the top 10, and well, you know very well that it's because of the urban heat island. I will not get back into the details here. And you know as well that this urban heat island means that it's hot at night and people do not get rest that they need. And so they either die or get tired and, for example, have work accidents because they work on the field and do not hear a dangerous machine going into that direction, and boom, you have a work accident. a fact that is less heat already affect our technical sphere. Everything that has steel, everything that has electronics has a maximum working temperature. Usually when I do this presentation, I give a lot of examples. I give examples of AC, air conditioning that stop working above 42, 43 degrees Celsius, of course. I give examples that your mobile phone has a maximum temperature, or that your fridge has a maximum temperature, so that it gets into people's minds that, yes, it's the everyday life that is going to be affected. It's the everyday life, but it's also our system, because if AC doesn't work, the AC for our IT is not going to work properly. It means our communication are not going to work properly, at least. And then some people might say, yeah, but how do they work in Spain or in Dubai, where it's the temperature are higher? Well, yes. Well, most of the time they don't have the same appliances. They don't have the same AC system. They have systems that are that can work for higher temperature. And so, at the same time, you understand that you can adapt a little bit by boosting some of our technical systems, and at the same time, you understand that there's going to be a limit at some point, and that we're not going to be able to adapt everything because there's going to be a lot of inertia to change all of this technical sphere into well, of course, we're not going to have the energy, the materials, the carbon budget to do so, but that's a more technical debate. And also, of course, climate influences, and heat in particular influences our culture. People living in other climate, they don't have the same schedules, they don't have the same food. So again, for example, you have people saying in France, oh yeah, but we can have like siestas, we can have lunch breaks like in Spain, where they close shops between midday and 4 p.m. They go back to their place, have a nap, and then they go back to work. Yeah, some people will be able to do that in Paris, but Paris is such a big area that there are some people who actually they need 30, 45, 60, sometimes even more minutes to go to their work. So they are not going to be able to do that twice a day. So those simple examples show at the same time that we have an adaptation capability, and at the same time that we are going to reach limits very quickly. But overall, what everybody, the 15 people in the missions, understood is that when climate change, it changes everything. They understood also that Paris at 50 degrees is already a reality. Here you have displayed temperatures that were measured during the last heat waves, 44 degrees into a school, because we don't have the habit to ventilate school at night, so the temperatures builds up. You have a 57 degrees register in the kitchen of a restaurant, etc., etc. I'll let you read. And of course, when you have heat waves earlier and later in France, because schools close in July and August, and when we have heat waves in June and September, it's a major problem for schools. And with COVID, we understood that when you have schools that need to close, it's a major disruption for all society. Most of the time, people still ask when is due a 50-degree heat wave, although I'm doing my best for them to understand that it's not a matter of when, it's a matter of already adapting to current heat wave and mitigating climate change so that we don't get a worse problem. And that's basically the only two slides using climate science. I want to insist on that in order to get the message across. we only invited one climatologist, Robert Votard. Mr. Viguier, who is in the room, was also invited, but that was for a more precise information that the overall understanding of the problem. Because that was the problem with climate science is that you are precise in a 30-year time frame, and when you say that, people understand. They do not get the 30 years time frame. They understand in 30 years from now. So that makes political decision more difficult. I'm also very regularly showing this graph because I think it's very powerful. I explained that each bubble is a heat wave, that the upper it is, the maximum temperature is reached, and the more it is to the right, the longer it is in weeks. I explained that the yellow is what we've experienced. I explained that the white circle is the heat wave from 2003. And then I explained that the one which is colored Bordeaux colored, like in the background, it's what we need to avoid by decreasing our temperature. It's the avoidable, it's the unmanageable that we need to avoid, and the red bubbles are the unavoidable that we need to learn how to manage. This is a graph that everyday people with no science background, they can understand that, okay? And most of the graphs I've been showing in the later years, I've simplified them to get into this one, and I think it's the most powerful I could find. Now, of course, we discussed what should we do, but politically speaking, the most important thing that was discussed is that yes, if we take things separately, we can adapt anything. We can adapt any school, we can adapt any electrical system, we can adapt any water system, any garbage collecting system, to almost anything. It's just a matter of how focused we will be on adapting that part of the system. But in order for the society to work, we need to adapt a bit everything. And the thing is that we cannot adapt everything to anything. So it means that we are going to have to choose drastically what we are going to protect, what we are going to adapt, and to which climate scenario. Because we will not be able to adapt everything to any climate scenario. So as politicians, we decided that school was the most important thing to adapt. And I'm going to give more details into that compared to the other slides. In the last few years, in some schools, we took out the bitumen, planted trees, and have schoolyards that look like this. We also decided to stop the cars from passing in front of the schools. So we whitened a bit the bitumen there, planted some low vegetations. All of this was necessary, but it was not enough. This doesn't change the temperature within the school. So we know that we have to refurbish our school drastically. Big renovations, usually they happen in July and August. Then people from the workers in this area, they are telling us that it's becoming more and more difficult to refurbish, to do this kind of physical work in July and August, because those are the hottest months in France. And so we because in Paris, the population of kids is decreasing, we decided that we are going to close some schools, and we do have a lot of schools. So we decided to close some schools to dispatch the kids in surrounding schools for a year so that we could have heavy renovations of those schools during a full year, using both passive techniques and in some areas to prepare some rooms with air conditioning, also just in case. Maybe investigate if we can use geothermal technologies, but uh, being very keen on having passive technologies that use natural cooling, natural effects, venturi effects, for example, so that those schools would not rely on electricity to be safe houses. And we want to refurbish those schools also, thinking that in case of major heat waves, the general population will be able to go there to stay safe, not just the kids, but also everyday people, starting with the elderly. So of course, that's a major change here, but I wanted to use that as an illustration as how we need to take very heavy measures in order to get ready for what's to come. Now, on a faster way, it means that every street needs to become a garden. And that's not easy in a city like Paris because it's so dense, but it gets easier if you believe that if you have a policy that where every Parisian becomes one gardener and will, with their local community, will take care of these new gardening areas, even if they are really small. The point is not to become food resilient. That's not going to work. But actually, when people take care of a garden altogether, it means that they will know better people from their community. And we have social studies showing that the quality of your social relationship in your community is the number one factor to build resiliency. So through this kind of policy, we can work both on the temperature and on the social connection between people. Of course, we will have to diversify the kind of thing we plant, so that we both start to adapt what's already there and bring some new species from the Mediterranean area, for example, which is hotter and drier. We'll have to work on adapting working conditions for the people working outside and who have physical work. Adapting means the schedule, but some of them are already working quite early, and we don't have a culture in France where people would work during the night. That would not be considered as acceptable in France. So my understanding is that we will have to go through doing less work during those periods. On an urban scale, we'll have to go with the wind. We've heard during the mission that actually in Tokyo there was a project to actually, in order to get the wind from the sea, go until a train station, that there was a building destroyed on the way. I don't know if it's an urban legend or not, but I've heard that orally, and we should have such a discussion in France. We don't have the fresh air from the sea, but we have some parks up hills, like Montmartre, Butte-Chaumont, or Père-Lachaise, that are fresh heavens, and we could use them to our advantages. And we should start thinking, should I build here or should I destroy a building here so that fresh air can save 100 or 1,000 buildings on its way. most of the buildings in Paris are pretty old, and so they are overscaled in terms of loads that they can sustain from the top. So it's technically possible to build some terrace on top of them, some wooden terrace on top of the zinc roof. We have right now one test built of scale 1:1 on a public building. But if you dare to dream, this is how Paris could look like in 30 years from now. I'm insisting on that because when you have something called Paris at 50 degrees, the first answer is emotional answer is, of course, that you create fear. Fear is an emotion that is different from anxiety because anxiety is related to something you don't have a lot of grasp. You don't know what to do about it. But fear is quite normal. If a lion enters the room where you are and you get fear, that it's quite normal, and it might help you to find to get the energy to actually act. So it's good to use fear, but you need to use hope. You need to have hope, and such solution creates hope among people. VT, you need to tell me if I'm doing all right in terms of timing, or I need to get into the questions maybe.
I thought let's just finish this slide and then interrupt you because it's very interesting where you're going, but a little compress on the time because we need
sure.
to.
Okay.
Thank you so much.
So very quickly, we discussed about there is a lot of places in offices in Paris where you have air conditioning, but it's not the case where people live right now. So there is a matter of how do we share those places which have AC already. We have a bit of water available, and we need to work on how those areas will be swimmable. Among the places which have ACs, we have our museums. So we could have a cultural policy where actually people get free access to those places, so they get freshened. And we need to help the poorest, the one people living outside, because we don't know how to deal with them right now during heat waves. And we need to create adaptation reflex where all the decisions made that are long-time decisions need to be related to the upcoming climate and not the past climate as we did previously. And as a conclusion, I just wanted to say that my hypothesis, my working hypothesis is that we have something like 10, 20 years where we can use adaptation as a way to leverage people into mitigation. Because when you talk about adaptation and vulnerability, you talk about the here and now and the everyday life of people. So they get more interested. And also, because most of the people in Paris, when you talk about them about the situation in India, they don't care. They simply don't care. It's too far. But if you talk to them about the future of Paris, then they get interested. So you can either regret it or use it to our own advantage. And also, when you talk about adaptation pathways, you have a discussion about what do we need to serve in order to live together peacefully. And that's a very powerful question. It's more positive than when you enter by asking what should we stop doing. This is, of course, you reach the same conclusion, but it's framed differently. And I think it could be, I want to test for the next years how we can use adaptation discussion in order to move the attenuation, the mitigation agenda. Thank you very much.
Thank you. It's really good to see how all the research actually gets into the public discussions and gets implemented at a city level, and how citizens together can be brought and involved in the entire process. Questions? I think there was one from Mr. Oka. Miss, if you would like to ask.
Yes, thank you. Okay, so my name is Kazutaka Oka. I'm from National Institute for Environmental Studies, Japan. So I studied the climate change impact on health. And first of all, I'd like to thank you for the wonderful presentation. And so today I have two questions. So the first question is that I think it is important to make the prevention of heat-related illness a personal issue and to change people's behavior. But unfortunately, even when we send out information about the countermeasure for heat stroke, there are people who don't listen to it for various reasons. For example, they don't feel hot even it is hot outside, or they think they are fine against heat stroke. So I think there are probably similar people in Paris. And but do you have any ideas on how to effectively reach these people, including initiatives and the experiences in Paris at 50 degrees? And so let me talk about the second question. So second question is that when introducing measures to combat heat-related illness, I think it is also important to clarify the effect of introducing these measures has on health outcomes such as morbidity and mortality from heat-related illness. And I think also, although short measures such as awareness raising are also important as heat-related illness countermeasure, however, it is usually difficult to measure their effect of soft measures. So I would like to ask, are there an example of evaluating the effect of introducing soft measure through initiatives and experience in Paris at 50? Thank you. That's my question. Thank you.
So, Alexander, can we take the questions together? Maybe 2-3 questions and then answer. Yes. I see Sabal has a hand raised, so if you could go ahead, please. Yeah.
Yes, thank you. Thank you for the excellent presentation. My question is, which interventions offer the best balance of cost effectiveness and long-term resilience? Thank you.
There was also a question from Leah. So if you could.
Yeah, thank you very much for your presentation and for the opportunity to ask a question. So I would like to know more on the co-construction process of the report with the other decision makers. For example, whether they are more sensitive to some adaptation solutions and for which reasons, or did you interact with decision makers from other territorial collectivities around Paris? In any case, what difficulties and opportunities such interactions have created? Thank you.
Yeah. Would you like to go ahead, Alexander? Thank you.
Yeah, sure. Thanks. Well, if I understood well the first two questions, there was one about how. First of all, I stopped on trying to convince everybody. It's too tiring. Regarding heat waves, and again, everybody who has lived in Paris for the last 10 years can tell you that it's tiring when it happens. And so I'm just trying to give clues to those people who are a majority. They are the majority, so I don't need to convince 100% of people. I need just to convince above the majority so that we can have and the more convinced they are, the more people are convinced. Sorry, the more drastic measures you can have. However, there is also we try something else. There is an institute called Human Adaptation Institute by Christian Clot. The guy is an adventurer and a researcher. He's been in very different places around the world, and he created a climate chamber that is movable. So it's attached to a truck, and then so that it can move around. And it means that this climate chamber means that you can experience different climate conditions, among them 50 degrees. So when you have people who are not convinced because they, yeah, I don't risk a heat stroke or whatever, you send them 30 minutes into that climate chamber, and then they will realize that, okay, 30 minutes is doable. But for example, because during the test, you have to have some cognitive test. Basically, you during those 30 minutes, you get dumb. Your brain doesn't work properly by the end of the experiment. This is a very, very, very powerful way to convince people that this is not something we will go through without catastrophes. And he is trying to have a lot of people from big companies, top executives, going into that climate chamber, and I think it's a powerful way to convince people who would be less convinced at the moment. When it comes to the effect of soft measures, I have the same problem, and it's a bit like the cost effectiveness and long-term residency, and what are the measures that are most efficient. I don't have data on that. You must understand also that Paris at 50 degrees did not create knowledge. We basically took, this is a very big summary made by politicians on the knowledge that was available, but politicians do not create knowledge. It's not an area where you create knowledge. So I don't have more information that you would find in scientific papers. Also, it was only a 6-month mission, half a day during a week, and it is the job of the executive, the people who the deputy mayors in charge of this, who would need to do an analysis in terms of cost effectiveness. In January next year, normally I will be invited to a meeting with the administration where they will show how they exactly have interpreted our recommendations and changed them into action plans. And during this discussion, I will have the opportunity to talk about cost effectiveness. So maybe I can get back to you with data in the context of Paris, because of course this is really related to context. During the mission, we had very little opportunity to discuss with people from surrounding cities. We did at the metropolitan level, but it was not a very thorough discussion. They were just explaining to us what they plan. And this is where you have, this is one of the limits of our work, because being elected in Paris, we didn't have the power to actually enforce measures to surrounding areas. This is of course problematic because if Paris, let's say, Paris cannot be an adaptation heaven if the surrounding cities don't do the same kind of work. And right now we are doing the contrary, because we have a national policy to increase how Paris is a metropolitan area. So we are building and building and building and building, which is not what we should be doing with such a dense and populated area. Yet, since the report got out, I got asked to do a presentation of the results, which is not exactly the same as I did today, because I wanted to give you clues on how we worked here. But I gave this presentation in the in the suburbs, in also major cities in France, and also internationally. I hope it will. Well, the problem they have is that it's a political problem. The technical understanding of this problem is quite high nowadays in France. At least in the administration, you can always find somebody who has really a good understanding of this, and it is thank God it's the person in charge of the problem. We have politicians who have a low understanding on the pace at which things are coming. So that's why I'm really not talking about half of the century things. This is right here, right now. And I'm trying to display examples of the suffering that is already created by the situation. But so we have a matter of political understanding. We have a difficulty that I consider it as I try to change it into an opportunity that adaptation is at the moment not in France. It's not so much displayed by the Greens, and the Greens are putting themselves into the lefties. But when you talk about preserving landscape, preserving the way we're living, protecting the population, you can address to people from the right, even from the conservative right, because it's into their values. And so that's at the same, if you talk too much with left vocabularies and values, it's a difficulty. But if you do not and you use other vocabularies, then you can reach out to much broader audience. I'm trying to do that. I've given the recipes to other politicians in France, and we have elections local elections coming in 2026. So I hope they will run their campaign using these techniques. We will see. For sure, we need to test a lot more stuff and see and work on the cost effectiveness and how much resiliency it brings. And I'm afraid the soft measures is going to be unmeasurable for a very, very long time. Well, just the fact to garden with your neighbors is pleasant is enough as a reason for me to do it. Even if it's not effective, it's just pleasant. So I keep on pushing for that.
Thank you so much. I think we are already eating up the break time, so thank you for the presentation. And there could be discussions happening later in the day. We're looking forward to the session on cities and etc. So, Tomoko-san, thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you very much, Mr. Furantan and Abashir-san for the keynote session. So we will have the very short break, and we'd like to resume today's session on cities and the governance on climate resilient pathways at 9:50 in UK and 10:50 in Central Europe, and then the 6:50 in Japan. Thank you. We are now resume the meeting. The next session is entitled Cities and the Governance of Climate Resilient Pathways. So we'd like to invite Dr. Vincent Viggy and then Christophe Cassen from the International Research Center on Environment and Development, CIRET, France, as a chair or co-chair for this session. Vincent and Christophe, the floor is yours.
So hello everybody, and thank you for giving us the opportunity of organizing this session. And I would like to thank you, all the panelists, for being there and for accepting to participate to this session. So today we have the pleasure to receive Eric Zusman from IGES, Diana Reken from the University of Twente in Netherlands, and Emma Ramsey from Nanyang Technological University in Singapore to discuss about the governance of climate resilient pathways in cities. So maybe I don't know, Christophe, if you would like to say a few introductory words, or maybe without further ado, we can start the discussions. And so, Diana, for instance, I don't know if you would like to start the discussions.
Hi,
So-
everyone. Hi, Vincent. Hi, Christophe. Hi, Eric, and all others.
And maybe just one logistical point. For some strange reason, Diana is presented as Emma Ramsey and Emma as Diana. So, yeah.
Hi, Emma. This is strange, indeed. So, Vincent, as you wish. I mean, in the program, it's actually Eric that starts, but you know the background of our work, so you can also, yeah. I'm fine. What you decide.
As you it's as you prefer. Yeah, maybe you can start then if you're
Okay.
We can go ahead like this, yes.
Okay, then. So thank you very much for the opportunity to present. Indeed, I am Diana Rakeen. If the Technic guys could actually change that in in the presentation, that would be wonderful. I am at the University of Twente in the Netherlands, and I am sharing my screen. So let's see how that works. So you should see my screen now. I just need to put it on presentation mode. Hope that still works. Yeah. Okay. So I am presenting on work that we are pursuing without the project, more on a collaborative basis for many years. And that is with a number of authors, as you see here, but Vincent is also part of the group. And we call this the Euro LCP initiative, where we have around 40 researchers always working on assessing adaptation, but also mitigation planning in European cities. And sometimes we use a sample of 327 and sometimes a sample of 885 cities, both drawn by Eurostat and the National Statistical Office across Europe. As I said, we are assessing both adaptation mitigation, but today I'm here talking about something on the adaptation part. And here a paper that was published in NPJ Urban Sustainability last year on the quality of urban climate change adaptation plans over time. So what we see and what also the IPCC has found in the latest assessment report is that adaptation is happening, but actually also in Europe, there are large gaps between the current levels of adaptation and those needed in terms of covering impacts. So even in Europe, we have an adaptation gap despite, let's say, more prosperous nations, more prosperous cities, large cities, and a long history of climate planning. And we are approaching that gap through research, asking why do we see such a gap in adaptation and how can we reduce it? With the current assessment, we try to address these questions by looking at the adaptation plan quality, as I said, and you could have guessed by the title of the publication. And we had two hypotheses also through earlier work, that there is too little focus on equity and justice, but also that there is an inconsistent urban planning And I will get back to that later, what we call and what we mean by inconsistency. So here on the top right, you see that this particular analysis was done on a European sample, this time 327 cities. They are called representative by Eurostat because they are evenly distributed in the countries and cover between 50 to 20% of the national population. So we talk about large and mid-sized cities. And in the map, you also see, but I have it, you also see a temporal development. The lower figure shows that we built an index based on the plan management cycle or an adaptation cycle or a planning cycle where you look at fact base and then goals and measures or actions, what we know about implementation, monitoring, evaluation, and participation. And in there also we built in a consistency element that means that we are checking that impacts and risk actually refer to goals, actually refer to measures, and measures refer back to the vulnerabilities and things like that. Yeah? So this is a bit smaller because now I am highlighting the results. I was told that we should aim for 7 minutes for the presentation. So the finding number 1 is that plan quality in European cities was increasing between 25 and 2020 by about 1.3 percentage points per year. So as I said, we built an index, and one dot in this figure here represents an index for one adaptation process in a city. So if we had more than one PDF document, more than one plan or policy, we included all of this. Because sometimes the monitoring and evaluation plan, for instance, is published differently. So that was all included and then combined into one number. So one dot is one city and one adaptation process. You see this dashed line going through. It is slightly increasing over time. The colors here are 3 bins of rather old plans, then medium old plans, and newer plans. Our cutoff date was 2020. The yellow refers to plans, so the first third of the plans until mid-2015. Then the second third was between 2015 and mid of 2018. And the last third between mid of 2018 and end of 2020. So we also see that more plans are coming up in a shorter period of time and plan quality is increasing. Finding number 2 then is what you would see here in the map on the top right. Newer plans are found in cities in Ireland, in France, and Eastern Europe. And there you see that the bullets are bigger. Yeah. In these countries, we see that cities have a national model to follow, so national guidelines that help them to come up with the structure or with the content of the adaptation plans. Then finding number 3, specifying adaptation goals improved most. So here we picture also according to these temporal bins, so older, medium old, and newer plans, we show how those principles across the planning process, how they have improved over time. And the second kind of bar chart cluster here is on adaptation goals. There you see the green bar is substantially higher than still the blue bar, which means that the newer plans got substantially better in specifying adaptation goals, making them more concrete. But as we have seen earlier, all those principles have increased over time. Then the finding number 4 is that adaptations plans are consistent to a degree between risks and hazards and the adaptation goals, and risks of industries and planned measures. So this is what you see here in the figure on the left-hand side is whether the risks that are mentioned or that are identified are also followed up by goals. So the first one is the bar. The first bar is on risks and hazards, and the second one is the goals. There is already quite a gap between risks mentioned and goals that follow up on it, but you see that the goals get more specific to the risks over time. And then the second figure is the same reading style that you have on with the first bar, the risk that are identified in certain industries and sectors, and then certain measures that follow up on those. And we also see that plans are and cities get better over time on that. But what we are actually found, and it's quite striking, is that if you apply the same logic again to risk for vulnerable groups. So again, the first bar is whether cities identify risks for vulnerable groups, and then whether that is followed up by certain measures. That decreases over time. So the red arrow is slightly decreasing over time across the 3 temporal bins again that we have drawn. This is shocking, which means that over time we are actually planning less and less for those people in need. And the right-hand figure here, the right bar chart, is again looking at measures for vulnerable groups and whether they are followed up by M&E. So if cities have done something for vulnerable groups, are actually vulnerable groups involved in checking whether that has worked. And there's almost no vulnerable group involved in M&E. Yeah, that's also quite striking. With that, we looked at these forms of consistency a bit more. I don't want to go into details of that, but just on the right-hand side, you see here C1 to C5. So we have 5 forms of consistency and looked at that in a bit more detail. We see on average 8% of the plans do something. So without that is in particular in C2, you see this, the darker gray is pretty large, and this means that cities do something for sectors, but most often actually in sectors that were not identified as particularly vulnerable. So they just do something. And we see that only 11% of the plans are consistent. So when you have a risk and an impact, you follow up with goals, you follow up with respective measures. The measures that are planned for vulnerable groups, these are involved in M&E. And then those vulnerable groups that are identified are also part of a also involved in participation of plan development. These are actually the 5 consistency measures. And only 11% are really consistent with these, with regard to these indicators. On average, 16% of plans identify risks that are not followed up with anything. So that means that there is actually a huge impact on the adaptation gap. And then my slide is not advancing. Now it should. Just saying that going back really quickly, that this analysis has reached quite some impact. So we are now also assessing adaptation plan quality of national adaptation plans, and we adjust the ADACA index, as we call it, this adaptation plan quality index, to the Covenant of Mayors database, and analyzing their plans as well, and also checking for consistency of these plans. So with regard to the two main questions that Vincent gave us, how can current adaptation research be useful for local decision making? We see that adaptation planning lacks a focus on justice and actually increasingly goes down. Looking at justice, there's a lot of sectoral action without risk assessment, so meaning that there is no risk really identified, but cities do something. And I would argue that we need to plan more for those in need. And the second question was, to what extent research and adaptation done in one city can be translated to another city? And from our research, we see that adaptation lacks internal consistency and planning. I here have the numbers again, and I assume that this is because cities are copying from each other without reflecting on their needs and vulnerability aspects. So that might actually be partly induced also by these national guidelines that cities too quickly overtake the model that is presented to them or copy from other plans in a city network without really truly reflecting, or quickly doing an adaptation plan. And then we see that it's not really focused on their needs, on their vulnerabilities, and on their risks. So in that sense, I think city models or city networks are good, but cities should not regard them as quick fixes to their adaptation process. And that was my presentation. Thank you very much. Happy to discuss further later on.
Thank you very much, Diana, for this great presentation. Maybe as time is running, we can directly go to Eric's presentation, and then we can discuss together. If Eric, this is okay with you.
Yeah, thanks, Vincent. That's fine by me.
Okay.
Thank you very much, everybody. My name is Eric Zussman, and I am a research director at the Institute for Global Environmental Strategies in Hayama, Japan. I'm going to be presenting some insights from a project that we're implementing with resources from the Wellcome Trust in the UK. And this involves several different organizations, including IGES. My presentation will focus on how researchers can help cities make connections between climate change and health, and thereby strengthen both their mitigation and adaptation actions. I think that the sort of starting point for this presentation is that there's a growing understanding both among researchers and I think cities as well, that there's strong synergies between health and climate change. And that's both in terms of the mitigation side of things as well as the adaptation side of things. And so I think these connections and these potential synergies are something that can be exploited both to, for instance, reduce the costs of mitigation, but also to move forward with policies and programs that are more well aligned with the sort of One Health perspective and align with some of the principles and tenets of sustainability science. Further, I think making these connections can appeal to a wider range of stakeholders. And this was implied, in some of the comments on equity in the previous presentation, and align the interests of different agencies that are working on climate, health, and other concerns. So the bottom line is by making these connections in policies and plans, cities can raise the ambitions of their climate actions and move forward healthy net zero transitions. At the same time, to make these connections, I think that there's a growing role for researchers to work directly with cities. So the project that I'm working on with Welcome and many of the participating organizations is aiming to do just that in 3 cities in Japan. So this is Kawasaki City, which is a rather large city in between Tokyo and Yokohama of about 1.5 million people. Niigata, which is a medium-sized city of about 700,000 people, located on the opposite coast of Japan, and Hachinohe, which is a smaller city of approximately 200,000 people, located on the northern part of Honshu Island. In addition, the project is also exchanging experiences between those 3 Japanese cities and 2 other G7 cities. That's Austin, Texas, and Paris, France. We actually had the pleasure to introduce some of the Japanese colleagues to Vincent earlier this year. And now, in terms of helping cities make these connections, I mean, one of the things that we learned pretty quickly from the project is one of the effective channels to do that is actually have the cities talk to each other. So, I mean, some of the most uh, important learnings from the project thus far have come from, for instance, exchanges between policymakers and researchers in Kawasaki and Austin, Texas, on the issue of heat stroke. And so this sort of experiential learning and site visits and this type of exchange, I think, is one of the ways that we can help identify sort of commonalities and also some differences in ways that cities can make connections between climate change and health. So those experiential moments are really important. A second thing I think we can do to help encourage these types of connections is to provide cities with tools that help illustrate how health links to not only climate change, but the different environmental pathways that it links to climate change through, the different health impacts that might be had from those pathways, and then the different types of impacted groups. And so what I'm showing to you here actually is a beta version of a tool that my colleagues at IGES are developing. And what that tool will help do is show for different types of climate change plans in the 3 countries that we're working in, whether and to what extent they're making connections between their different sectoral actions, those environmental impacts, the health impacts, and then the impacted groups. And part of the motivation for doing this is not only to sort of visualize these things, but also to serve as sort of a benchmarking to see to what extent cities are making connections across these 4 different areas. So developing a tool that can help visualize these things can also help cities make those connections. A third thing that we can do as researchers, and this has already been implied by some of the remarks, is provide evidence that's already supporting sort of national policy directions or national policy mandates. So one of the things that we see happening in the context of Japan is the national adaptation policy puts a very strong emphasis on the connections between health and climate change. At the same time, cities don't necessarily have the capacity to look at what might be the impacts of, as we heard at the very beginning, of a 4-degree or a 5-degree future on things like heat stroke. So one of the things we're doing through this project is working with researchers in Hokkaido University to help cities visualize and see under different climate scenarios what would be the impacts of different temperatures on heat stroke cases. And so this is something that's been useful for the cities to take a look at and also useful for them to understand in a way to convince not only policymakers, but also politicians to invest more resources in interventions, whether that be nature-based solutions or that might be some infrastructure changes, what have you. So providing evidence that aligns with national mandates is also important. Similarly, one of the other things that we're doing through this project is to provide new evidence. So one of the things that's not emphasized that much in Japan, but is emphasized, for instance, more in the United States, is the linkages between climate change mitigation and the sort of typical co-benefits argument. So mitigation leads to reductions in air pollution that has health impacts. Now, part of the reason this is not emphasized as much in Japan is the air is already relatively clean. Having said that, even in the context of a city like Niigata, a medium-sized city, we can still demonstrate that by moving forward with their net zero plans, there'll be some reductions in fine particulate matter, and those reductions in fine particulate matter will also have health benefits. Of course, this is also particularly important for an aging society. Those health benefits tend to be greatest for senior citizens. So demonstrating sort of new evidence, as well as evidence that supports national policy directions, is important. And this type of evidence can be communicated outward to, the public and once again to politicians to support, raising ambition or accelerating action on the mitigation side. And then one of the last pieces or one of the last sort of messages I want to share is regarding, how to make sure this evidence actually is owned by the city policymakers and citizens. So one of the things that we've done in the case of Hachinohe, the smaller of the three cities, the smallest of the three cities I mentioned, was to work through a co-design process and try to foster ownership of some of this work. And so what you can see here is not only some analysis of the different health impacts of renewable energy within the city, but a series of stakeholder-based workshops where we identified scenarios that work for the city, and also then showed the health benefits of those scenarios. And importantly for these workshops, I mean, part of this was done with the city officials, but part of this was also done with the local Rotary Club. So there was a significant outreach component of these things to make sure that there was a broader base to support some of the work. Now, the last point I want to make regards as governance issues. And I think this is important not only for making connections between climate change and health, but climate change and other development priorities. And then once we've made those connections, how do we sort of upscale solutions that have those connections at their heart? And on this point specifically, I think it's important to understand and appreciate there's sort of different governance models that can help with that upscaling. And one governance model, which I think receives a lot of attention and sort of implicit in a lot of our work, is on your left-hand side here. I call this sort of multi-level, or if you want, multi-sectoral governance, where you're trying to promote, breaking down silos between different divisions. So this is very simplified and sort of more of an ideal type demonstration, but, economic, environment, and social, or even within those areas, health and climate. So there's this sort of a horizontal dimension where you're trying to break down silos by strengthening coordination. And then there's a vertical dimension where you're trying to work across different levels and ideally provide also coordination that would help upscale sort of successful cases. Now, the other side of this, I'm going to move to the other side of the diagram, is what I would call a more polycentric governance model. And this is coming a lot of the work of Elinor Ostrom. But I think a lot of folks, sometimes they conflate the sort of multi-level and the polycentric version of these ideas. My reading of Ostrom's work is that rather than, focusing on sort of this sort of boxy sort of linear model, I think a lot of what she was suggesting is that there's actually a lot of overlap between different levels and across different sectors and across different agencies already. And while that overlap might not be ideal to some extent, it might create some duplication, and it might also lead to redundancies in some of the functions of different agencies. I think in some ways she also found this is sort of more realistic, and in some ways also more healthy. And part of the reason I think that she felt this was healthy and is rather than necessarily always focusing on, linear coordination or cooperation, I think she was trying to emphasize the fact that there's also competition. I mean, competition across different agencies and sometimes competition between different, especially local level governments to try to come up with innovative solutions. And I think one of the messages that comes from her work is that competition not only can be healthy, but if given the right incentives, when you have that type of competition, you can come up with innovative solutions, and those innovative solutions then can be scaled up with appropriate incentives, fiscal reforms or whatnot. I mean, I have no idea what's going to happen in the next few days, or in the U.S. under the Trump administration. But if you look very closely at, for instance, the Inflation Reduction Act in the U.S., it has a lot of this characteristic where local governments are applying for resources from the national government. They're trying to recognize connections between climate change and other development issues, including health. But there's some sort of competition implied in that process. And that competition, is over resources that would lead to funding some of these things and then potentially scaling some of these things. I guess my bottom line here is I would like to suggest that we should pay more attention to these different types of governance models. Some might be more appropriate in different contexts, but the polycentric model, I think, has a lot going for it, especially when it comes to making links between climate change and health. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Eric, for this great presentation. Maybe if it's okay with you, Emma, let's switch directly to your presentation, and then we will discuss all together on this.
Yep, sounds good. Thanks, Vincent. I will share. Okay, so thanks for having me today. I'm excited to share some perspectives from Southeast Asia. Okay, so I am a research fellow based here in Singapore at the Asian School of the Environment and the Earth Observatory of Singapore. I'm part of the Resilient and Inclusive Cities Lab led by Perrin Hamill. We're interested in nature-based solutions and increasing the evidence base for these in the Asia Pacific, with a particular focus on informing policy and practice. So I research heat. Heat is a massive challenge here in Southeast Asia because it's not just summer that we're worried about, it's every day, it's hot, it's humid, and it's really urbanized. So today I want to share some perspectives from 2 climate resilience projects that I work on in the region. The first is the Cooling Singapore 2.0 project. As the name suggests, this is one of many iterations of a long-term heat mitigation project in Singapore. It involves all of the major universities and has massive buy-in from the government. And a second slightly different project called Resilience for Communities, based in Malacca in Malaysia, just across the border. This is led by the Malacca City government and facilitated by the Resilient Cities Network. Now, I thought for the themes of today's sessions, these would be 2 really interesting projects to talk about because these cities are just a few hours apart. They're climatologically very similar, but otherwise extremely different cities. Both of these projects, we're focusing on urban heat resilience and heat as a challenge. And in both projects, we work really closely with government stakeholders as really they're the ones leading the projects. So I think there are 2 cross-cutting questions I want to talk about here relating to what Vincent sort of set as the themes for this panel. The first is how to best co-create research in these really applied projects to make sure the work we do in academia is relevant. And using these projects as an example, because this was really our aim, is can we translate the knowledge and tools from the best practice we're developing in Cooling Singapore to a city like Malacca? So in the early stages of Cooling Singapore, in talking to the government agencies, the Urban Planning Authority and the National Parks Board, we identified a need for a really user-friendly and simple tool to model heat mitigation. Now, Singapore has no shortage of good science. We have lots of fancy models. We have a digital urban climate twin. But what we heard back from government was actually this isn't so useful for them. They want something more simple that can be used by on the daily by planners and policymakers. So we turned back to the trusty old INVEST models. Many of you may be familiar with INVEST. It's a suite of models developed by the Natural Capital Project at Stanford. They're open source, they have very minimal data requirements, and they're designed to be user-friendly. So even in a really knowledge-rich place like Singapore, we turned back to INVEST, and this has been one of our main scientific outputs, was calibrating and validating the urban cooling model for Singapore. This predicts urban air temperatures, and you can model various greening scenarios. Very happy with the results. Of course, there's lots of great data to do this calibration and validation process in a city like Singapore. So this was one of, I guess, the wins for transferability in this case. Malacca and Singapore are climatologically very similar. INVEST is a biophysical model. So we were able to translate our calibrated model and apply it in Malacca. This was very useful for us because at the start of our collaboration in Malacca, we were brought on really because there was no data or no information on urban heat. So having a quick tool that we could deploy to produce some maps and have a really tangible starting point and talking point was really useful to start thinking about this as a challenge and talking with the city and with the other collaborators. This also really highlighted the key knowledge gaps. While Singapore is really solutions focused, what we immediately found in Malacca is we're back to square one. We need data. So I want to share a little bit about some microclimate monitoring work that we're doing. This was just a couple of months ago. We've been deploying microclimate sensors across the city and inside houses in low-income communities to capture the true extent of heat, the heat challenge in the city. Of course, this is providing really essential data, but it's also been a really useful way to engage and educate communities, but also with the city itself. To share some very quick data fresh off the press, and maybe just to also emphasize the challenge of heat adaptation in a city like Malacca. This is sort of the diurnal variation in indoor temperature in 2 different communities. It's not really getting below 28 degrees at night. That's pretty damn hot, and it's getting well into the 30s during the day. This isn't even in the hot season. This is just an average couple of months in Malacca. Similarly, looking at wet bulb temperatures, if you're into humid heat stress, which I definitely am, it's a similar story. Wet bulb temperatures of 25 and 26 is pretty damn hot to be living in your day-to-day. Similar story outdoors. But I think what I want to highlight with this kind of data is then we can start going to the city. Okay, look, we know heat's a challenge. We know it's really hot, but look, this park that you have, it's actually 2 degrees cooler than the urban core. And that's giving them information that they can start to act on and maybe understand a bit more how that can feed in to their policies. Similar story again with the wet bulb temperatures. So I guess my takeaways that I want to share from these 2 projects was, I think the success of both was that we worked with our stakeholders, our government agencies from the start to identify needs and co-create the research rather than the other way around, doing the research and then sharing it back to the policymakers. I think this is the way that academia should fill key gaps in these very applied projects. But of course, different cities have very different needs. They are just a few hours away, but Singapore and Malacca are at very different stages. And so the kind of science that we might do in both cities is quite different. I think something that struck me though about both of these projects, we really don't need to reinvent the wheel a lot of the time. A model like INVEST, which is globally applicable, is actually really useful even in a city like Singapore and even more so in a city like Malacca where we're starting from square one. We're moving into sort of the co-design phase for these projects. And I think similar to what Eric mentioned in previous presentation, we're finding that exchanges between the 2 cities are a really useful way to foster innovation and share best practice. although acknowledging the different urban contexts and what might be feasible in each is, I think, an ongoing challenge. So hopefully stay tuned for more on that in the future. I will leave it there. Happy to talk about any of this later. I love this photo from our collaborators in Malacca. This is what we love about working with people on the ground. And the city of Malacca has invested in a brilliant set of Sustainable Development Goal stools. So there's a bit of fun there. So thank you. I'll hand it back to you, Vincent.
Thank you very much, Emma, for this great presentation. And thank you very much for all the panelists for coping with the time limit. And maybe I have a question for you all related to the first overarching question of this session. So one idea was to discuss about how useful research is for local decision makers. And maybe something which is striking me is that in all of the three projects, there is a lot of emphasis on producing either graphs or figures or local analysis, really specific on the city, but on questions which are, let's say broadly already known. For instance, we know already that it's important to cool a city. We know that heat has impacts on the health, and we know that having, for instance, equity aspects in adaptation plan is important. And in all of the three projects, there was a strong emphasis on saying, okay, these results are already known or established in the literature, but look, when we apply them to your city, here are the figures and here's what is lacking. And then my question is therefore, to what extent do you think one of the key role of the research is to precisely show in different cities what is lacking compared to the literature, and to what extent is it important to just create graphs and figures on the local context? And did you think that this played a role? And the second question is that to what extent is it useful, or to what extent what is useful is to do this for several cities so that cities can compare to each other? And so I don't know if you have any, if my question makes sense, and if you have something to say about this. I don't know who would like to start.
Sure, I can start if you like. Yeah, I think that's a really good question. It's sometimes the graphs and figures that we produce, the city brushes over. They don't, I don't think they're actually interpreting them. So I think it has been a learning curve to figure out how to present data in a way that is impactful to cities. I do think it is worthwhile translating it. You know, we know urban heat is a challenge we shouldn't have to present, but presenting data for your city, for their city, and I think putting really hard numbers on it is really useful. So for example, like the indoor temperature data that I shared, we know it's hot in these flats. They don't have air conditioning, but to say in one flat, it's getting up to 39 degrees, I think that can be a real catalyst for a decision maker. We actually really need to do something about it.
Maybe I can also add a couple perspectives. It's indeed a really good question. I mean, as a researcher, we're used to produce maps, also for our publications. And I mean, in a publication, the maps are there for easier communication. So I think they serve a purpose, but whether they are, for instance, with city officials and with practitioners on the ground, whether they are actually a good communication means, I have never discussed with them. I would totally agree to what Emma said, though, that independent from the graphs itself, I see that it helps to have numbers. So some concrete figures are easier to remember, are more tangible to talk about, than just saying everything gets higher or lower, or gets worse or gets better, or something like that. So numbers help to focus. Numbers are probably also good for communication, and people can relate or get a feeling for how much or how little one is talking about if you have a number, even if it is, let's say, if there is an uncertainty related to that, which of course should then also be communicated, but it helps to focus, I think. So some quantitative relation in a wise and scientifically well argumented, and that I mean with uncertainties, way also helps the communication. Yeah, but with regard to the figures, it's interesting. I have never actually discussed it with people on the ground.
Just to offer just a few quick perspectives from this side. I mean, I think I think Vincent's point is well taken that, to some extent, we have good knowledge of these issues or these phenomena. But I think part of the reason, and I think a lot of the policymakers that we're working with have good knowledge of these issues. But I think part of the reason for doing the figures or the visualization is they can use that to communicate with people that don't have good knowledge of these issues. So, I mean, in particular, politicians, I mean, I think city mayors, some of them are already convinced, okay, we're doing something on climate change, but the mayors don't necessarily have the evidence at their disposal, and they don't have time necessarily to read through your report. But if you can give them 2 or 3 compelling figures that show what the implications of climate change are for their city, um, and related to that, why they should spend money on this issue for their city. I think that can take what is a very good policy argument and make it into a good political argument. And I think that's part of the connection that we're trying to make, when using these figures. I think that's part of it. I think the other part of it is for, sort of the general citizenry. I know, for instance, in Hachinohe, this smaller city, after we've worked with them for a little bit, they've invited us to come back to the city, and they have like public lectures on climate change. And they want us to show the figures and the data. Not the more complicated stuff, but the sort of stuff that puts some numbers around what the impacts might be for the city. And so I think, once again, visualization can help communicate to audiences that might not have a natural inclination to understand the phenomenon, or might not have the time to, understand the phenomenon, but can appreciate, with, I don't know, a 3-degree temperature increase, that's going to mean a lot more heat strokes, so I can understand that. So I think the communication to different audiences behind this, besides the sort of usual suspects, I think is part of the reason for visualization.
So Vincent has just joined us again. His laptop has just crashed during the discussion, but but everything is okay.
My laptop decided to shut down. I don't know. Anyway, so thank you. And then my second question, I mean, related to this, and sorry if you told about it while I couldn't hear. It's about the question between the comparison between cities. I don't know if, in your experience, what was more impactful was to get some figures about a city, or to say, look, in your case, you can get this result, or this is how it is for you, compared to other cities, which would call for a different kind of type of research, because in one case, looking at specific cities is important, whereas in the other case, upscaled work is required. And I don't know if you had any thoughts about this.
I can maybe start this time. There we have quite a few insights from this comparative analysis at the European scale, actually. So I already mentioned in the presentation that cities that so the latest, so the younger plans were more often done according to a national guideline, and these seem to follow, or these seem to then be used as imprints in stone. So you need to do this and this and this and this and this, and too often they're not really addressed to the local level. But on the other hand, there seems to be a real need by the cities to talk to each other and to learn from each other, because what we have also seen, for instance, in a mitigation study, is that 90% of all cities that we investigated were part of the Global Covenant of Mayors after they have started the mitigation process. So they kind of wanted to do or started to develop a mitigation plan, and afterwards they saw, oh my gosh, maybe this needs more resources than we have, more knowledge than we have, and then they joined a city network. So there seems to be a lot of need for interaction, need for collaborative learning. But then my impression is that this is applied too quickly and applied without a thorough reflection on whether everything is really useful for the own context. Yeah. So I think we can provide this to cities. It really helps cities if we allow for this interactive and multi-city learning, but we should still tell the cities, look, don't take this over blindly, still reflect what you need from this. So that would be, yeah, maybe the first input to that.
Yeah, maybe to add on that, I think we have to tread very carefully, especially working with cities with very, very different capacities and at very different stages of the adaptation. Maybe in that sense, there's also the biggest potential for learning and exchange. But I think what we like talking, or maybe like say sharing a solution from Singapore to colleagues in Malacca, it's like, that'll never work here. It's dismissed straight away. So I think, yeah, we have to be very mindful. I'm not sure that they love being compared. I think working with an NGO like the Resilient Cities Network, they're very good at fostering these connections. I mean, networks are great, and fostering sharing. I think a lot of maybe I think as academics, we're very interested in comparing and doing these broader scale comparative studies. I don't think in all cases that maybe cities themselves are interested in these results. I think they want to know what's going on for them and what will work for them. So yeah, maybe that's an outstanding challenge, is how to balance that gap and foster more learning without comparing with each other.
I would like to add on to this real quick that indeed in another project of mine, we also wanted to couple cities, not in a real case that they should be or become twin cities or collaborators, but we just wanted to suggest this climate analog approach that is the climate in 2050 or 2080 is now already seen in Northern African cities, for my case of European cities. And that didn't go well at all. So the local municipal staff didn't like that at all. They're just not, they don't see the value in this, and probably I need to agree, because in particular with the Northern African context, the culture, the policy, the governance is really, really different. But even as a comparison to how hot the climate is, cities didn't want to be compared or even twinned or even, compared in terms of climate issues, kind of from the top by research. So yeah, then rather, but I think that's a good thing, that then they say, no, let's just focus on our current context here, our political and governance models here, because what I just said earlier, too often kind of maybe an artificial comparison is not applied to the local context. But yeah, I have the same impression, or I had the same experience like Emma shared from her Asian cities.
Some quick reflections on this comparison and exchange between the cities. I mean, as a social scientist, I'm sort of trained to try to, compare cities that are basically pretty similar in many different characteristics and might vary in one important variable, and try to make some comparison that way. But with this project that I described, I have to be quite honest. When we put together the project and put together the different cities, we didn't have the sort of necessarily the time to think through that type of arrangement and and the connections to make those that sort of perfect arrangement. So, but what happened in practice and what was interesting is I found that the cities from Japan, when they started to talk to the policymakers from Austin or from Paris, they knew precisely what their needs were, and not everything that Paris and Austin were doing were related to their needs, but there were quite a few things that were, and they were sort of able to peel off insights that were useful for them from the experiences of those cities. So, for instance, in the case of Austin, they have a really an interesting program on how to um, take care of the green spaces, the parks that they have in the city. And this is a big issue in Kawasaki. And so they really dug in deep on that issue to try to figure out what Austin is doing and how some of those solutions and approaches could work for them. Similar thing could be said about some of the cooling centers and the oases, that school oases that you see in Paris. Kawasaki was really interested in these issues, and then they focused a lot on that. Whereas a city like Hachinohe didn't have such a well-defined set of interests, but they could take away different insights generally for how cities were making connections between health and climate change, and then start to think about, okay, these are where my needs are, and then I can start to pick into certain things that are useful for me. So, that doesn't give you a real systematic, research-oriented answer, but it does suggest that cities, I think, they have good knowledge of what they want to do or what their city looks like, and then they can, based upon their own context, they can find places to learn from other cities.
Oh, thank you for these answers, and I guess something which is within everything that you said, I guess it's the issue of what is the role of the academic expertise for cities compared, for instance, to city networks or to the expertise, the high expertise, which is sometimes within city administrations. And I guess also another question is that each of you studied different kinds of cities, big ones and small ones. And it might be expected that the larger cities can have the expertise within the administration because they have more resource. And that a big question is, how can smaller cities do? And I guess that in every country, academia doesn't have the resource to work on every small city. And then one big question is, what can be done for them? What can be done to help adaptation in smaller cities, and is there something which could be done by academia or not? And as the time reaches the end,
I add just a quick word on that reflection. I think when you present your evaluation of the quality of adaptation plan, Diana, I think maybe one criteria could be how to evaluate the internal resources of cities to produce this adaptation plan and to implement them. Cities need different competencies from engineering to administration. And I think, and also considering maybe this articulation, the competencies to dialogue with scientists, that could be maybe a criteria to think about for the quality of the process. That's just the idea or reflection.
Christoph, thank you very much. Indeed, I agree. So we should go more into this because it's probably a capacity issue, yeah. And also, what you mentioned in the chat already, right? Yeah, that we need to see how we can capture that, because in particular smaller cities and also on M&E, for instance, where we found huge lags. M&E is a little bit a different issue than coming up with a plan, huh? Looking how you can actually see whether something works is a different exercise. So yeah, thank you very much.
I think that the time is running up and that we have to close the session. I don't know, maybe if you just have 2 minutes, if you have some final words on these questions, on this topic, or one specific issue that you found particularly noteworthy.
I'm just going to say one quick point, Vincent, then I'll close off. I just on the sort of small and big cities question, I do want to say one of the things we found working with a smaller city is while they do lack capacity and they perhaps need more support, it's easier to coordinate. I mean, the people that work on health and climate change and finance, they all sit in the same floor. And when you have a meeting, they are all willing to come at the same time. And they know each other perhaps better. I mean, and so when it comes to perhaps, you know, well, we're about halfway done with our project, but when it comes to, integration between climate change and some of these other development issues, I might not be surprised to see that the smaller city, it finds it easier to make those connections because the people and the proximity of the offices works to their advantage. The small sort of counterintuitive point there.
Yeah, maybe just one quick point from the sort of research I do is sometimes I think the biggest role I can play as an academic is almost just as a knowledge broker. So whether that's going to the National Parks Board of Singapore and being like, hey, there's this existing tool called Invest. It works really well in Singapore. You don't need us to use it. It's online. It's great. We're going to Malacca and saying, okay, here's what the data says about your city. I think that, yeah, distilling the existing science down for them is what we can do quite easily.
Okay, sorry, Diana.
I was just saying that I think what we also saw that is there is a real need to start with the cities early on, so that we really need what their needs are, and then we can help much better, and then maybe we can prevent that a lot of actions are there that are unrelated or that are copied from other cities artificially. So I really also want to underline that point that was made by Emma earlier, that or was it Eric that sorry, that it's worth to integrate cities right from the beginning to know their needs, and then we can more dedicatedly work with them on these issues.
on this last point, and before I conclude, just one quick note. I don't know how it is in other countries, but in France, over the past years, there have been a quick development of what was called local IPCCs, in which researchers, for instance, I'm part of the one with Paris region, so small associations in which researchers basically do quick appraisals of what the literature say on local cities. So it's not long documents or whatever, but it's just like helping translate what is in the academic literatures for the local decision making. And the results are different from one place to another, and whether it works or not, but that's the kind of initiatives that we begin to see, and I don't know whether it's the case in other countries actually. I'm sure it is, and that's the kind of things that we begin to see. And so, thank you very much all for this all these discussions. I mean, it was a fantastic session, and so I give the floor back to
Moko and the Secretariat. Yeah. Thank you all. Thank you, panel.
Thank you very much,
Thank you very
Ansan,
much.
Christophe, and everybody. So we will take the very short break here, and we will resume the panel discussion on integrating local policy and action at 11 in UK, at 12 noon in Central Europe, and 8 o'clock in Japan. Thank you. We are now resume the meeting. Next up is a panel discussion on integrating local policy and action. We'd like to invite Professor Joyous Leroy from the Asian Institute of Technology, AIT, to chair this session. So Joyous Lee, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. And I wish good afternoon, good evening, and good morning, depending on which time zone you are in. I thank the organizers for ending the year with a wonderful thought-provoking webinar so that we start next year with new enthusiasm for making this world a better livable place for all of us. The theme of this session is integrating local policy and actions. And I think this really follows very well based on what was discussed in past 2 hours. However, what I feel is that it is well recognized in science and everyday discourse that we need broad-based climate action by citizens, professionals, financial institutions, businesses, and policymakers. But what to do at various levels by various social actors are also well identified. And examples are there from various countries and are growing as well. All these experiments and mesoscale scale up, sometimes macro scale up also, but also deaths after the niche experiment also. So how so far climate policy architecture has worked is interesting to note, because some actions have happened with coordination at scales and which has survived. But others have not been integrated either vertically or horizontally. If we look through multi-level governance perspective and also through enabling conditions lens, or as we heard, the polycentric approach of governance where the compatibility across the different actions have been considered. Today, we have very illustrious panelists with us, and we will hear from their experience to understand our way forward. We have with us Professor Frank Lecoq, who is the director of CERED, Professor Stefan Lechtenbaumer. If I'm not pronouncing it correctly, please do not take offense on this. Professor Kassel University in Germany, Dr.
I can only name the first one, Dr. Alejandra, and she is the laboratory manager, laboratory impacts on the territory and the developing countries in Italy, if I'm not wrong. Then Dr. Sergio Lamotta, who is a researcher from ENIA in Rome. And we actually are not going to get Professor Rob Gross because he is having health issue from last night, so he can't join us. He sent his apologies. And Professor Toshihiko Masui from Nice in Japan, and Dr. Mikiko Kainuma from IGS Japan. So what I would do is that I would request each panelist to present your first reactions in 5 to 6 minutes, so we can have a lively discussion afterwards among yourselves and also with a large number of participants in this webinar. So I will start with Frank and would ask him to present his thoughts to the audience. Hi, Frank.
Hi, thank you very much, Yoyashri, for the introduction, and thank you to the organizers for the invitation. As you pointed out, and as the thematic session in this meeting have already illustrated, there is now a tremendous amount of policies and action that is being taken, implemented at all scales. Yet, as Jim Skea pointed out yesterday, this activity has yet to result in emission reductions that would put us on a global pathway compatible with 2 degrees in 2100, let alone 1.5. So clearly more ambitious policies and actions are required. And with this tension in mind, let me try and briefly outline 4 challenges that I see for better integration of local policies and action. The first challenge is measurement. To my knowledge, there's no real placeholder for recording policies and action at any scale. This is not just a database issue, but also more fundamentally a question about what constitutes mitigation action and policy as distinct from a non-mitigation one. There is also no clear metric, again to my knowledge, for the measurement of the impacts of these policies on emissions, let alone on other dimensions that are relevant to mitigation, such as mitigative capacity, for instance. And if you don't have a common language, then addressing the next challenges becomes, of course, more difficult. So the second challenge I can see to integrate local policies and action is consistency. The last IPCC report and many of the examples that we have had in the previous 2 hours document instances of misalignment between policies and incentives at different scales or across different sectors that delay or hinder action. There's really a strong need for institutional reforms. This is well documented, but ex post evaluation of policies and actions can probably provide more lessons on what works, what cannot, and where are the stumbling blocks that should be removed to help these policies move forward. Third is a challenge of comprehensiveness. Actions remains uneven across regions, cities, sectors, whatever. If diversity is good, ultimately mitigation needs to happen across the board. So to address this issue, one needs some level of integration at a higher scale, say national for local or economy-wide for sectors. And there's clearly a lot happening in this front. Policy instruments being put in place, carbon prices, norms, whatever, to support and incentivize mitigation across the board. But there's also, I wanted to flag that there's also a lot of action happening in terms of coordination, more like in France, we have this planning, mitigation planning that is in place. There are strategies, plans, blueprints, roadmaps, whatever. And I think also ex post analysis of how these processes are going on, which are successful, which are not, and why, would also be quite helpful to move forward. Finally, the last challenge I would like to outline here is equity. When you have large differences in actions across regions or sectors, or that paves the way for backlash in the future, as some people may wonder why they are so much ahead while the others are lagging behind. So finding a way so that the distribution of effort is perceived as fair by the majority of stakeholders is really fundamental. And I guess, again, in terms of research and way forward for this, it's to make clear what are the distributional consequences of different policies and actions that are taking place in all their complexity, so that at least if one cannot decide what is a fair distribution of effort, one at least has a correct picture of who wins, who loses, so that sound decision or sounder decisions can be made. So I guess there's a lot of work for us academics ahead on measurement, consistency, comprehensiveness, and equity. And I hope that can be a research program for the network. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Frank, for starting with a very useful, observations that what is in progress and what is lacking in knowledge. So what is the knowledge gap? And so that's really helpful. So before we open it up for discussion, I would request Stefan to share your thoughts.
Mm-hmm. Yes, thank you, Jayashri, and thank you also to the organizers. I hope everybody can hear me well. Yes, wonderful. So, as I have chaired yesterday the session on industrial transition, I would like to link the topic of industrial transition to net zero or to climate neutral industries to the aspect of cities. One aspect which is really related, but not often seen, these relations. But I can say cities play really an important role and different important roles in industrial change. In the first place, they are typically the places where these transitions of industries also happens. So as industrial transition and just transition are mainly regionally focused and tend to happen in cities and larger and smaller cities. We already heard in the session before how diverse cities are, and starting with cities like Singapore with a lot of not only wealth but also power, even being a state, to smaller rural municipalities. Or municipalities dominated by industries, sometimes even by single industries. So that's really a broad range. But cities is typically the place where industrial transition happens. And I would like first to go on, so to say, the problems of the transition, because transitioning industries to climate neutral covers a lot the heavy industries like steel making, petrochemicals, cement making, and other heavy industries which are heavily polluting, heavily energy intensive and emission intensive. And phasing out of these typically old industries is concentrated in industrial regions. Often these are coal regions as well, faced by phase out challenges due to climate change. And so regional problems, just transition problems, culminate in these industrial cities. On top of these, the cities already typically suffer structural problems for several years, and so they are not very dynamic. They typically have environmental problems, and this all is sort of at least perceived locally as making the transition or has been made worse by the transformation of the industry towards climate neutrality. And these additional challenges then, of course, are endangering the economic fabric, but also the social consistency of these cities and regions. And may even push such cities into downward spiraling developments. And particularly the smaller and medium-sized cities in highly monostructured industrial regions are mainly affected by that. So on the first glance, cities are really a hotspot of these transitions, or not all cities, but many cities are hotspots of these transitions and face many challenges. And also are the places where resistance to the change may occur due to this culmination of problem and adding on pre-existing problematic situations. But on the other hand, also cities can and have an important role to play, as they are also the decision-making centers and the network modes. So we have learned yesterday in our session that there are quite different regional types of industrial clusters. And cities are typically and can be the capitals and focal points of regional industrial clusters, so playing an important role in changing industrial regions. They can also be the location of diverse, typically very diverse urban industrial clusters with diverging interests. But what they are definitely typically are is the place that brings the actors together and enables them on the one hand to respond and structure the challenges of the transformation, but also to work and react on the problems. Of course, also cities can bring actors together in a destructive manner. So that's the challenge, to foster the constructive role cities can have and not let them delve into destructive manners. And this means, I think, for the national and international policy on climate change, on industrial modernization, means they have to address the concerns of the cities. They have to take serious these concerns, and they have to make a strong focus on the development and support of the capacities of these industrial cities to structure and shape the transition locally, support it locally. Of course, it will not work only locally. It needs the framework condition, the support from other levels. But cities are an important place really to bring that all together and take into account also local environmental and equity aspects of it. So I think, as for many other aspects we have talked over in these 2 days, cities are also very crucial focal points of the industrial transition. And I think that's important that policies for that take this into account and take it serious and try to structure it in a proactive manner. So thank you.
Thank you, Stefan, for bringing out very important aspect, because if we see history, then all city developments were around the cities. And so how that has impacted and how that is going to be transitioning is an important aspect. We'll come back to this during our question answer session also. So let us now hear from Alessandra, if I have pronounced your name correctly.
Alessandra, yes, Alessandra De Marco. I don't know, yes, probably you don't see. Okay, it's my name. You can see, yes. Okay, and I would like to focus on the main topic of my my session organized yesterday. So in particular on the importance of the cities in enriching decarbonization by the use of urban trees. So there is a big distance between the theory, we have to plant trees, and to the realization of this. Because the main problem, one of the main problems is which tree we can use and where we can use these trees. And this is a very big question. Because everyone likes trees, but we don't know enough what are the impacts of these trees when we put these trees. Because we know that the trees can uptake pollutants, we know that the trees can decrease the temperature, but we don't know exactly what is the final situation when we plant the trees and where. For example, the city are in cities that are very highly built. We cannot put the trees into the city, and this is a big problem. So how can we obtain results with trees if we don't have room for them? And one of the solutions that we are investigating is the possibility to put the trees in peri-urban areas. and for a reason of for variability of land. And when we investigated the impacts of these peri-urban trees at the urban level, we saw that the process is different city by city. This is in line with what said in the morning by the speakers, that each city has different behaviors. So we have to look at specific city, and we need a tool to know before what will happen if we plant the trees. That's a very important point. Because otherwise we cannot reach what we expect. So the policies, local policies are very important, but should be really local. When I say local, it's not a general concept. Local means depending on the country, depending on the city, depending on the situation in city. And so the final take-home message is that more projects, more money, more information are needed to do the correct process to obtain decarbonization. The trees are a good tool, but we have to use this tool in the best way. And another point that I want to highlight is that we are doing this changes. We are trying to understand how to do these changes in Europe, for example, but we don't know if the underdeveloped countries should be part of the decarbonization process or not. So what I want what I intend is, if we have to export our concept of the urban forest or the green infrastructure and so on in developing countries. This is an important point that should be highlighted. I think, yes, this is an important point, and we have to estimate, because again, we have a different situation. We have sometimes in underdeveloped countries, we have temperature that is not permissive for some species, so the situation is more complex for some aspects. But I think this is a part that this is an important point we have to think about. So, and with this, I close mine.
Thank you very much. But I have another question to you. So do you know if Sergio is going to join today?
No, Sergio, no.
Okay, all right, that's fine. Good to know. Thank you. We will come back to you, and I also have something to add to that. So let's hear first Toshihiko Masui, and then Mikiko, and then we'll come back to the discussion. So I think Toshihiko is having some problem with his camera. But
yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, sorry, my camera doesn't work now. So without
That's okay.
camera, yeah, I'd like
Not
to
a
talk.
problem. Not a problem.
Okay. Good afternoon and good evening. Thank you very much for inviting me the quite important meeting. So I'm the researchers of the using the integrated assessment model AIM, and I'm involved in discussion on the greenhouse gas emission national scale, the greenhouse gas emission reduction target in Japan. So from that viewpoint of the national scale, I'd like to talk about the local scale issues. So in Japan, the many municipalities declares net zero or zero carbon cities, but actually there are quite few the municipalities show the real roadmap. So the problem is the how to estimate or how to evaluate the roadmap to achieve the net zero. So one of the reasons why is the lack of data because in the case of the national scale, there are many data, but in the local scale, due to the unclear boundary, so quite the few data is available. And also the problem is the capacity of the policymakers or other stakeholders. So we may need the promotion of the capacity development. And also, yeah, the local issues, the local policymakers will have to create many issues, not only carbon, the climate change mitigation, but also other issues, including the social issues like the aging and especially in the case of Japan, the reducing the population and so on. So so maybe the policymakers will have to consider many issues, not only the climate change issues, but also other issues. So the most of the cities show the kind of the downscale from the national roadmap to achieve the net zero. But in that case, yeah, the features, the local features, it's disappeared. So we may need the bottom up, showing the bottom up, we may show the roadmap from the viewpoint of the bottom up styles, but there are very big gap to show such the bottom-up approach and the data and capacity development and so on. So so I think in order to solve these issues, we may we may promote the capacity development and also we will have to consider the local resources to solve or to combat the climate change issues and how to utilize them. So we and also we will share the information and discussing the various stakeholders. So such the networking is also quite important to promote the local the decarbonized issues. So I'm now just on the way to support such kind of issues. So yeah, I'd like to get your suggestions and your comments for that issues. Yeah, that's all. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for raising a very important issue and which is under discussion how to do this capacity building at the bottom-up level. Mikiko, can we hear from you now?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes.
Thank you, Joyasri. I'd like to share with you some examples of net zero efforts in local municipalities in Japan, as well as the challenges associated with scaling up these initiatives together with residents. As Toshi mentioned just now, it's many, almost all local municipalities declared net zero, but actual situation is a little bit severe, and we need a roadmap to them. And but one thing I want to stress here is there is significant potential for installing solar power generation capacity on agricultural land. But at present, these efforts seem to be driven mainly by individuals who are passionate about protecting the environment, and it cannot yet be said that they have become widespread. The challenges include barriers to entry, such securing land, initial cost of installing solar panels, the impact of solar panel installation on farming activities, and the potential reduction in crop yields. So support from the public institution is crucial. And Toshi also mentioned about the aging in Japan, but also particularly in the local areas and in the farming pits. So farmers, the average age of farmers are increasing, and not so many young people do not enter into the farming because of the reason that I just mentioned. But if we combine this farming and solar panel, so the agri-solar farmland, we have some panels over the land. Then they can earn some money. So and also this may attract young people to enter this farming. I think this is a little bit optimistic, but I hope such kind of things will happen. So in addition to the introduction of solar power in agriculture, many other measures are being implemented. Tokyo, for example, has mandated the installation of solar panels on new buildings and requires new buildings to meet specific insulation performance standards. In transport sector, various measures are being taken to encourage a shift from cars to public transport. In Yokohama City, the introduction of electric and hybrid buses is being actively promoted. Another measure is the operation of community buses, which play a particularly important role in areas with limited transportation infrastructure. And there are many other factors to consider when addressing global warming, including sufficiency, well-being, a just transition, and a circular economy. I'll mention briefly about it. The concept of sufficiency goes beyond simply increasing energy efficiency. It involves reducing consumption itself, which leads to a decrease in CO2 emissions and support the transition toward a sustainable society. It is difficult to force people, of course, to embrace sufficiency, but there are policies that can encourage individuals to consider it. These include education, incentive schemes, the development of sustainable infrastructure, the promotion of recycling and sharing, and encouraging the reduction of food waste. Many cities, including Tokyo, Yokohama, Kyoto, and Matsumoto in Nagoya Prefecture, have incorporated the concept of sufficiency into their global warming policies. In Yokohama, the city's realization of Eco-Life initiative focuses on ensuring that each citizen minimizes energy and resource waste. The city has also created an Eco-Life manual to guide residents, but it's just still a manual, and I'm afraid not so much. They really we implemented it. But anyway, it's one thing and the global warming policy that emphasizes well-being are also being implemented. These measures aim not only to combat global warming, but also to improve people's happiness, health, and quality of life. For example, Sendai City is conducting awareness-raising activities related to green infrastructure and eco-living. And Tokyo is implementing initiatives to enhance the equity of life for its residents. Just transition is also crucial. In Hokkaido, they are promoting the adoption of renewable energy while supporting the re-employment of individuals who have worked in the fossil fuel industry. Cities like Tokyo, Yokohama, Nagoya are also working on energy transition, providing support for daily life and employment. To build a sustainable society, promoting a circular economy is essential. Many cities are actively working on the use of biomass energy, circular agriculture, increasing recycling and reducing food waste. Many local authorities are working towards achieving net zero. However, there are still challenges to overcome before we can fully reach this goal. So in Japan, the introduction of feed-in tariff in fiscal year 2012 started and led to a sharp increase in the installation of new solar power generation system. But the annual installation rate has declined due to the decrease in purchase price. A new system feed-in premium was introduced in fiscal 2022 to replace FIT. FIT is the price is fixed, but feed-in premium is the price is changing depending on the situation. So at present, it is difficult to expect a significant increase in installation. In addition, there is a growing movement among local residents opposing the construction of solar power plants. Of course, developers must ensure that their projects prioritize the safety of the local community and minimize their impact on the environment and landscape. Moreover, it is crucial for local governments and developers to work together to maximize the benefits of solar power generation for community and promote local understanding. To achieve this, I think it is important to involve citizens in the policymaking process. The Climate Citizen Assembly in France is well known for its success. In Japan, climate citizen assemblies have recently been held in about 20 municipalities. Citizens' opinions are being incorporated in climate change plans in cities. While these assemblies have primarily taken place in Tokyo metropolitan area, they are beginning to be held in local cities such as Sendai and Matsumoto in Nagano Prefecture. But it's only 2 cases out of 20. So I hope this movement continue to spread. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mikiko, for coming back to this. So what I'm just thinking is that, okay, one thing I do not know how to bring all our panelists in the screen. So I tried, but I don't know if if the organizers can help that will be really great. Otherwise, I'll just go for the gallery view. But it would be good to get all on the screen. So what I was just thinking is that basically, if I look at what Frank started with, he said that we do not have good metric and method for measuring what is happening at the local level and how to aggregate that to see that what is really happening. I hear from all of you that there are multiple things happening and multiple things need to happen. But it is also important to see that how we can measure that, because sometimes what happens is that in the models, we get the very top-down view. And then we also said that many things are happening on the ground, but we are not able to match them and say them that how far we are able to aggregate them. I'll just give 1 or 2 examples because say, for example, in India also there are these building codes, because in India, most of the cities are getting built new now. So they have enough scope for, like Alessandra said, what tree and where to plant. So in the building codes, they have that what will be the boundary trees that they need to plant and what percentage of land need to be kept for greening when they are building bigger community footprint of buildings. So, and also for that, what trees to be built because they need to be resilient to the cyclone and storm so that that really doesn't cause infrastructure problem when there is cyclone or storm. So adaptation and mitigation also needs to be thought of. So when I talk to the city officials, what I feel is that in the developing countries, they are trying to do in bits and pieces, and they are trying to do mostly through their infrastructure design and the buildings. So, and building codes. That is happening quite a bit. But another thing which did not really come up here is the large informal sector in the developing countries. And that works on a completely different governance system. And so how do we really reduce the future vulnerability? And also how do we provide them with better infrastructure and the technology access so that they can make less wasteful choices also. But then also it has some city legalities question. So these are very complex issues. So really anything has to happen at the local level, but how do we really bring them up, but also at a very faster step so that we just do not spend time for 10, 20 years for learning what to do for each city, but how to speed it up, the action also. That's really important. So what I would suggest is that, Frank, you have heard other speakers. So from your lens of what research needs are, how do you see that, how these local actions can benefit if that kind of framing is there?
Thank you. I guess there are from what I've heard two things. Maybe I would 2 points I would like to make following the discussion. The first to re-emphasize this issue on measurement, or where I was also coming from. In the previous IPCC cycle, when we were preparing a chapter actually with Toshi, we had a discussion on how to integrate not only national. We were tasked with looking at action at the national level, but also at the subnational level. All sorts of initiatives going on in city network across sectors, etc. So we have this very long list of actions and plans going on, and we tried to come up with some form of an assessment of what that would mean globally. I mean, what was it, big, small, etc. And we ended up not doing that, or really putting a lot of caution about this kind of figures, because indeed we were comparing pears and apples. There were overlaps between the things. Some policies and measures that were counted as action in one were not in others, etc., etc. So that's where I'm coming from on the measurement issue. This is, I think, a really practical matter. The second that I think point I would like to emphasize, which I tried to make very briefly in my introduction, is really the role I think of processes at larger scale, need to try and bring people together, take stock of what they are doing, agree on common metrics, which may be different from one country to the other, of course, depending on. I think there's also a lot of experience going on in many countries, and looking at what processes and how countries are doing this would be very useful. In the French case, for instance, we have this Secretariat, National Secretary for Ecological Planning at the level of the Prime Minister office, which is sort of tasked to bring everything together. And at the same time, you have regional conference of the parties, happening in the different regions. So there are two levels where people try to bring things up. I'm not sure whether this is yet we can say whether this is successful or not, because especially the national and the regional level, there's still a wide gap. But at least those are attempts to bring people around, again, just taking stock of what they are doing and trying to forge some form of common understanding of where we might be heading. I suspect there are many more examples in many other countries that I'm not aware of, but I really think this is a useful place to look at. Thanks.
Yeah, no, this is actually very important, because we need to understand that every local government or municipality or whatever, they have their own goals for development, the local development. And there are national scale goals also, that what needs to be done. So how these local goals can be made compatible and not contradictory with the global and the national goals will be really an important issue. And how can we make that some kind of metric based assessment or evaluation, so that we can understand where is the compatibility. That will be really helpful. I'll just give one example that, so in India, we have the National Action Plan on Climate Change, and which tries to see that what will be the national deliverable. But then there are state level, that means subnational level action plan also. But sometimes, as we heard in the earlier presentations in the cities, that sometimes they are just copy pasted, because these are sometimes consultant driven. I'm sorry to say that, but then so they just copy paste, change the name of the cities and just produce the state action plan, because as there is a discussion about the capacity, so the capacity comes from the consultant, and then consultants are given so short time. So in 1 month time, they have to produce a state action plan, or 3 months they have to. So what I'm just saying is that practice and what is needed, there is need for such discussion, that what kind of capacity, how that capacity can be built. So that has been brought up by Toshi. So that's really important. And we need to see that. Okay, now what I want to come back to, Stefan, is that, Stefan, so you mentioned that the industries are also, industrial transition is also very closely linked to the city transition, right? And historically in Germany, you have seen so many cities have actually made transition because of the deindustrialization of that place, or they have shifted from one kind of industry to other kind of industry due to modernization and all. So do you think these historical examples can also, bring forward that what needs to be done and what can be avoided and what is the learning? Would you like to say something from the examples of, there are so many, there are Bochum, there is Wuppertal, there are so many, I know only 2 more, and that's why I said, but you know much better.
Yes, thank you, Joyashi. Maybe just briefly on the topic you discussed before on comparing local actions. I think at least in the European context, and we heard that in the previous panel, there is covenant of mayors or certain certification schemes for municipal action. And I think, although not being perfect, that could be also, these are interesting instruments to make that better visible, better comparable, create sort of, or try to create good practice standards for local planning, etc., and local action. I think Maybe that's already existing for some time in a very European context, but maybe and definitely probably is not covering your aspect of informal economy, informal settlements. But maybe this instrument can be expanded and can be used more broadly than it is currently. So that maybe as a hint on this measuring of action, because that's really important. When we talk about structural change, yes, there are a couple of interesting examples how cities did that, also internationally, but that's never very easy, and typically it boils down to local governments, municipalities trying to link citizens together and create new visions on what can come, how to cover. I would say many of the good examples can be seen come only after there has been significant decline. So probably that's not all of a good example. Even if you look at the US, the UK examples that probably we all know, typically new development came after old things broke down, and this so some German industrial regions are really trying not to do that, but it's really tough. And I think that goes via interaction with local and regional actors, and trying to use the local networks, the local potentials, the power that the regions still have, even if they are in decline, to create something new as early as possible. That's typically a big challenge, and I think so there's lots of research to be done, because we all know that's old structures tend to dominate new structures, tend to block new developments. There are vested interests typically linked to these changes. So I think I cannot really tell of real good examples on that. I think there are interesting models, but no perfect answers. But I guess this topic is not only a historical one of German, American, UK, French regions, but we will see that also in many places in Asia in the near future. And so I think there has to be a lot of research to find good solutions on that.
Yeah, I do agree with you. And actually, in India also, there were many areas which were deindustrialized at some point of time. And then there are varied examples of success stories and failure stories, and how the cities declined completely. And then it was very unjust and very non-replicable transition. But there are others which were very well managed. And so there are many learning from that. So I think we can dig out those and then find out that what are the learnings from those, and that can help in advancing the city level transition linked to the industries also. So another thing which I was just thinking for, I mean, Alessandra, that you mentioned that trees are, I mean, it's very important, the greening of the cities and how that can manage the heat island effect also, as we were hearing the heat island and heat-related health risks in the previous two sessions. So, so in the existing old cities, it might be really difficult to find new spaces for planting new trees. But in the new cities, as I said, it is happening through the building codes, city planning code, and all. So if you have some examples which really helped or which helps, that might be useful. I know there is a lot of a research gap, but then it will be good to know.
Okay, yes, you raised a very important problem, because as I said, what is important is to see the initial state of the city and then to understand what is possible to do. That's why we are trying to work with city already very urbanized. For example, we work with Florence. Florence is a very urbanized city with a lot of building in the city center, so it's not possible to put trees into the cities. That's why we are investigating different scenarios. We found a tool to realize what is the situation when we plant trees outside the cities, in peri-urban areas. So we try to, we even have some example. Elena Poletti yesterday showed even some picture of the urban forest, peri-urban forest we have realized in Florence, and we have measurements before the reforestation and after the reforestation. And we found some beneficial effects. And we even demonstrated the beneficial effects in terms of mortality and economic gain, even in the cities, because exactly in the city, because the pollution is moving and you cannot stop. And with the trees, we have different concentration of pollutants in the cities. And even for example, one impacts, positive impacts of the trees around the city is the reduction of the tropical night into the city. And that's an important point. So the tropical night is the night when you have the feeling that you cannot breathe because it's very hard, and you can decrease the night with this feeling. So this is something that is tangible. You can feel it. So it's a one example. But if you apply the same scenarios of reforestation in other cities, for example in Zagreb, we don't have the same beneficial impacts. So it's city dependent.
No, that's true. And then we heard from Mikiko and Toshi that what is really needed is a roadmap that really needs to be made. I mean, that's really coming up that we need a roadmap, and then also the measurement, metric, and then the policy frame to help and enable these transitions. Before I go to Mikiko and Toshi, I just wanted to open to the floor if there are questions, because we are also nearing the end of the session, and I forgot that I did not ask the floor. Sorry. So from floor, if there are questions. I'm not seeing any hands up though. If I'm not mistaken, I don't see any hands up. Okay.
There is some question.
In the question answer.
This is for this session.
We have some questions in the box, Q&A box. Did you see?
So you mean in the question and answer box? Q&A box?
Yes.
Yeah, but in the Q&A box, I see these are from the earlier session. But so I just wanted to know if there is someone who wants to really ask the question, you can raise your hand and then you can ask the question.
Yeah. The time of the question was so 7:52 in Japanese time. So not for this. Sorry.
Yeah, no, that's okay. So, okay, if there is no question, but I would come back to Mikiko as well as Toshihiko, that sometimes what happens is that, as you said, for bottom-up road map building for climate change, for the city level, there is not enough capacity. But do you think by including or involving the educational institutions in the cities, you can really build that faster. So can that happen? So in the developed countries, I want to know that how fast it can happen, say, for example, in Japan, because I feel that when we talk of this in, say, for example, in India, I have seen that they do say that, okay, we want a roadmap, you give a document and that stays with the government department. They might be taking bits and pieces, but not systemic changes. So I want to know, Mikiko, and from Toshi, how do you think that's really going to
Yeah. So,
that kind of, yeah.
okay, can I first? Yeah, I had a chance. It's okay. Yeah, I had a chance to talk with high school students in last October, and they are very, very positive thinking people, and they are talking about how to reduce food waste. And they are also helping the neighbors, farmers, and working, sometimes work together. And they have very, very, in their high school, they talk each other. And I have another example that the research is, this is a research from high school, and one high school are now developing the, with students develop the curriculum, there is a curriculum, and students developed what they had better to do to reduce emissions and thinking themselves. And provide, they have some meeting with the neighbors, and they tell what they had, they think what they should do or they can do to reduce emissions. But this is not, this is, they are starting to several places, but I think such kind of movement in the junior high school or senior high school, they can now thinking by themselves, and also the, of course, the university students doing such kind of thing. Thank you.
I mean, this is actually interesting because many of the university campuses are trying to be net zero also. And so those can be good learning point also. And in Thailand, we have sufficiency principle integrated into their corporate, school, and every policy. And this exists since 1950. So they have been 1970, they have been really doing it in the planning process also. Before I go to Toshihiko, I just want to, I know there is a hand up from Fumi Kobo Furuko. So if you can really, tell your question.
Yes. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay. Good morning and good afternoon, everybody. Thank you. I'm Fumie Kubo Kuroko, part of Environmental Service. Also, I belong to Tech Mahindra Japan. Today, I'd like to share something else with you. It's about comparison of the cost effectiveness of various technological solutions as countermeasures against climate change. The data is a little bit old, but I hope it's still effective. According to it, insulation reinforcement is the top technology, the most cost-effective. So I'm carrying it on my room curtain, etc., and promoting the project for insulation reinforcement of houses in Japan by Gaina. It's insulation paint. And next target is the data center buildings. I'm hoping. I wonder if that research result is still effective to convince the industrial communities, and also if it's still effective these days, because it's a little bit old information. So I like to share the file hold on a second.
If you want, you can share it in the chat, and then so that people can get access to that, because now we are over 2 minutes, our final time also. So just I want to give last word to Toshihiko. If you have anything to add based on whatever has been discussed, that will be really good to think what is the way forward.
Okay, yeah, thank you very much, Joyasri. As you mentioned, at this moment there are very few capacity for the local municipalities, but I think that yes, they can show some the a kind of the co-benefit between the decarbonized issues and the economic benefit in that regions. I think that if they consider that their local the resources, maybe they can show some the proposal considering both the decarbonized issues and the economic development or economic benefit. And also, the most another important issue is the climate change impact. So each region may have a different the climate change impact. So maybe each regions has a different the adaptation strategies. So to meet the each regional features, we can each region may have some such their own strategies, and as Frank mentioned, those strategies may need the consistency with the national or the global issues. So at this moment, there are very big gap, but we will have to bridge these gaps toward the 1.5 degree goals or decarbonized issue. That's all. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I know we have crossed the time. Just one last word I want to say that, so basically we are saying that local actions have in the past has so far really focused more on their economic goal and how to achieve that. But then cities are also starting looking into the mitigation. Some cities are focusing more on adaptation. Some are also focusing on sustainable development. But I think we are not thinking all four things together, how to integrate these economic goal, adaptation goal, mitigation goal, and sustainable development goals together, and how to make the city planning more compatible with all these four goals will be really an important endeavor of the researchers and working with the policymakers. So with these words, I think I need to close this because I have taken up 6 minutes more from everybody, but I hand it over to Tomoko now. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Joyasri, and then thank you very much for the steering members of the LCS-RNet. So our annual meeting held over 2 days has just concluded its entire program. Once again, thank you very much to all speakers and then the audience for your participation. We hope all of you enjoyed the sessions. So see you again the next year's annual meeting. And once again, thank you very much and then happy holidays. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. And happy holidays and happy new year to everybody.
Thank you.